Throughout our study, we have already noted what a special place that the church occupies in the kingdom. That place that we as the church, we as the body of Christ, our place will be next to Jesus Christ as His bride, His glorious bride. If we live long enough and Jesus comes back and we're raptured, or if we go on to be with the Lord prior to the rapture, we're going to enter into the kingdom in a glorified body. A body that will never get sick again. A body that won't need a cane to walk around. A body that won't need glasses.
Yeah.
A body that will never get tired. No more arthritis. No more sugar problems. No more heart problems. A body that will never wear out. A glorified body for all of eternity. No aches, no pains, no soreness. Nothing that we know from this life. The survivors of tribulation will enter into the kingdom in their human body. Revelation 19, beginning in verse 7, begins to describe this great event that awaits us, that awaits the church when Christ comes for His bride. And he said, "Let us be glad and rejoice and give honor to Him. For the marriage of the Lamb is come, and His wife hath made herself ready. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. For the fine linen is the righteousness of saints. And He saith unto me, Right, blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper of the Lamb. And He saith unto me, These are the true sayings of God." Let us rejoice and be glad. You know, we don't have to wait until the millennial kingdom to rejoice and to be glad and to give honor and glory to the Lord. The marriage supper of the Lamb, the marriage supper of Jesus Christ, is the time where He will receive His bride, the church, for which He died for, that He gave His life for. It's going to be a glorious occasion. A glorious occasion. I was reading in Matthew 26 this morning, where Jesus sat and He broke bread with His disciples. And He talks about, in verse 29, I believe it is, how He says, "I'm not going to do this again until I'm in my Father's kingdom, when we're gathered together at the marriage supper of the Lamb." To understand just how glorious that it's going to be, we kind of have to compare it to an Oriental wedding, the kind that the Apostle John would have been writing about, because it helps us have a little more understanding. You probably know, but in biblical days, marriages in the Orient consisted of 4 very distinct parts. And the marriage began with the betrothal, what we would call the engagement period, the engagement time. An arrangement would be made by the father to acquire a bride for his son. And it was a legal contract. It was a binding contract. The engagement, the betrothal itself was as sacred as the marriage itself was. And that's why if you go back and you look at Joseph, when he was ready to divorce Mary because he discovered that she was pregnant, even though they were just betrothed or they were engaged, that's how important, how significant the engagement was. But a father could arrange his son's marriage long before the son was ever of age to marry. And they would reach an agreement with the father of the future bride. And that agreement, what it meant was when two people came of age, they would be married to each other, and they were to save themselves for one another. The agreement was something that was legally recognized. So Paul, knowing all of this, draws on this concept to describe the church's relationship to Christ and Paul's role in that bond. He told the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2, he said, I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. He said, for I betrothed you to one husband, that to Christ I might present you as a pure virgin. Every Christian became a part of the bride of Christ, or Christ's bride, the church, and became engaged to Him at the very moment of our salvation. We belong to Christ. Even though we haven't made it to the wedding ceremony yet, we belong to Him. So to give ourselves to anyone or anything else would be spiritual adultery, because we belong to Him. You know, there was often a very long time between the betrothal and the actual marriage. For most believers, there's a long time between salvation and the time that we are reunited or united with our beloved. Well, Paul, knowing that we have that long betrothal period between salvation and being united with the Lord, he was concerned about false teachers that would come in that time period. That they would slip in, that they would, especially as he wrote to the Corinthians, that they would come in and lead the Corinthians away from their faithfulness to Jesus Christ during that betrothal period. The truth is, though, we were actually betrothed to Christ by God the Father from before the foundation of the world.
Yes.
So we've been engaged for a long time from heaven's perspective. Our betrothal to Christ will last until He comes for His bride in the rapture. And it corresponds to the second stage of that oriental wedding. The bridegroom went to the bride's home to bring her back to his father's house so that she would be with her husband where he was. I go to prepare a place for you. I don't have to read all of John 14. You know where I'm going with that. That's why Jesus said that He was going there to prepare that place so that we could be where He is. The second part of the wedding, of being the bride of Christ. The third stage of the marriage was the wedding reception itself. The wedding reception, the bridegroom introduces his bride to her new family, to her new life. The bridegroom invited his family and his friends to the wedding reception, and a lot of weddings in biblical days, and what we're reading, what we're talking about, could last for a long time. It could be quite the celebration. See, people in This culture, the New Testament days culture, didn't have these brief ceremonies like we do today in front of an official and then go to reception and it lasts a few hours. That's just our culture. It's the way we do marriage today. But depending on the wealth at the time of the bridegroom's father, the wedding reception could last days, it could last weeks, it could go into months, where they would have all of these very elaborate dinners, night after night. You imagine doing that today? Well, guess what? Our Father's rich beyond measure. And so His Son's wedding reception, the marriage supper of the Lamb, is not going to last days or weeks or months, but 1,000 years. 1,000-year wedding reception. And it's going to be exciting. It's going to be glorious. You know, when you go to a wedding, everyone admires the bride. People ooh and they ah when they stand and turn and watch the bride begin to come down the aisle. And they see her in her beautifully adorned gown and the glow that she has as she approaches her soon-to-be husband. The bliss, the marital bliss that you see. The people in the millennial kingdom that we talked about just a moment ago that enter into the kingdom at the end of tribulation, that will be in their natural bodies, they're going to admire the church. They're going to admire us because we are going to be in a glorified body just like Christ. That's why John said, we shall be like Him. Now the ultimate focus, though, of the wedding party will be on the bridegroom, Jesus Christ. He's the one that will take people's breath away when they look upon His glory, when they see Him for all of His glory and in all of His glory. His radiance is going to be magnificent. But that radiance of the bride is going to be magnificent as well, because it will be a true reflection of Him. We will be like Him, is what John meant. Everything that people will see of the bride will be a perfect mirror reflection of the bridegroom himself. The fourth and final stage of the wedding was the happily ever after part. Part where the bride and the groom would go off and they would begin to enjoy their life together. And for us, it corresponds to an eternity of joy and happiness with Christ. Not weeks, not months, not even 1,000 years, but eternity. No time. Time will be no more. So the church has a very special time coming when Christ establishes His kingdom. And as Christ's bride in the kingdom, we are going to not only rule, but we will reign with Him in the way that a king's wife shares the throne. Paul said that the church will judge the world. 1 Corinthians 6 talks about not only judging the world, but also judging even angels. That will be the role that we will play. In chapter 20 of Revelation, John said that as resurrected saints, that we will reign with Christ for that 1,000-year, that millennial kingdom, that we will reign with Him. Romans 8 says that we're fellow heirs with Christ. And so our level of authority in the kingdom will depend upon our faithfulness to Him on the earth. That's why the Bible talks about laying up treasure What we do here will determine how we are rewarded when we get there. What we are faithful with here will determine how we rule then. If you're faithful with few, I will make you ruler over many. And explains the parable of the servants from the 19th chapter of Luke. Jesus rewarded the first two servants with authority over 10 cities and 5 cities, respectively. And Jesus is going to administer His kingdom through us. Think of all that He has entrusted with us. In this life that we live now on the earth, He has entrusted us with His message, with the gospel. What we do with the gospel will determine how He entrusts us with authority in His kingdom. Now you change the imagery of that of a bride, we'll be Christ's governors in the millennium, because we're going to rule with Him. People say, well, what will the millennium be like? What can we look forward to during the rule of Christ on the earth? Well, we've called the millennium the golden age of man, and that's what it's really going to be like, because everything that we know that is wrong with this world today is going to be set right. Everything that's wrong with the world today will be no more. During the millennium, one of the first things that I want you to see is that mankind is going to enjoy the long life that people have always desired, the long life that people have always wished for. Length of life will be immaterial to the believers who are raptured with Christ. We're going to live for eternity. It's not going to affect us. We're going to have our resurrection. We've entered into an eternal state at that point. But to those who are saved at the end of tribulation, the one that we talked about from Matthew 25 that Jesus called His sheep, those that He places on the right, they're going to enter the millennium in their natural bodies, and they will continue to live and continue to have life and continue to procreate, as we have already seen. They will live on earth returned to its original perfection. They will live on an earth full of beauty. They will get to live on the earth full of fruitfulness, an environment in which long life will become the norm. I want you to listen to Isaiah. Isaiah 65:20. No longer will there be in it. No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his days. For the youth will die at the age of 100, and the one who does not reach the age of 100 shall be thought accursed. I love the first part of that. No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days. The only reason that people will die young and not live out their days in the millennium is if they become foolish enough to rebel against Jesus. Now we know that will happen. We know that will happen because when Satan is loosed, that he'll go around for 3.5 more years and gather up one last group. But everybody else will enjoy that long life. It brings us to another feature of this 1,000-year period. When Jesus Christ sits on his throne, no rebellion is going to be allowed. Disobedience is not going to be allowed. Seeing what we see in our lives today, where we look around and it looks like everybody's just getting away with everything, it's not going to happen. Revelation 19:15 says that Christ will rule with a rod of iron. And that's how it should be. Because we're talking about a perfect king. A perfect king who rules in perfect righteousness. A perfect king who rules in perfect justice. And Jesus will demand obedience. And the good news is he will have it. But those who don't conform out of love for him will do so because they rightly fear his rod of iron. They will have a holy reverence for the Lord. But even nature, even the animal kingdom in the millennium is going to be brought under the control of Christ. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and dust shall be the serpent's food. They shall do no evil or harm in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. Isaiah 65:25. The wolf, sheep. The lamb will graze together. The lion shall eat straw like an ox. The nature in the animal kingdom that we know today, that it's eat or be eaten, kill or be killed, will be no more. And I love that, because I'm sure you know I've talked about this, but I love animals. I love nature shows. I love going to the zoo and seeing the animals. Can't get enough of it. I just love all of God's creation. I love the animals. And I get so disappointed every time that I'm watching these animal shows. It's like, here's this beautiful animal and they're building this story, and then here comes the predator and just takes it out, and I flip the channel. I don't want to see that. I wanted to see God's beautiful animal. I know it's a part of life, but it's not always going to be that way. During the millennium, when Christ sets things right and it sets it back in its rightful order, he says that the lamb and the wolf will walk alongside each other. They will feed together. That the lion, first thing I want to do is pet a lion. The lion and the ox feed together. No evil, no harm. Nothing in nature will be allowed to rebel or express itself in an unrighteous way. Isaiah 11:6-8 talks about how little children will be safe with these formerly wild animals. That if they wanted to go up and just pet a lion, they'll be able to. It's the way God originally designed it all to be. That's what the fight has been about since the Garden of Eden. Dominion over the earth. God gave that dominion to Adam, the first Adam. That's the way He intended it to be. To be this eternal state of perfection. We know that sin entered in, and it's been hell on earth ever since. But you can rest assured that it's all going to be restored by the last Adam, by the second Adam in the millennium. Christ is going to restore everything that was lost. He's going to bring it back to the way that God intended it to be, the way that God created it to be. We're going to be a part of that, ensuring that all of His creation is following what His desire is, what His will is. We're going to rule and reign with Jesus Christ. And what we rule and reign will be determined by our level of faithfulness now. Be faithful with what God has given you. Doesn't matter what you have. And it doesn't matter what we don't have. The thing that matters is what we do with what we have been given. Be faithful with few. I have to remind myself that all the time. Be faithful with what God has given you. And I will make you ruler over many, He says. Be faithful.